There's something uniquely terrifying about the disasters we can see coming. Hurricanes give us days of warning. Earthquakes, at least, shake the ground before buildings fall. Even tornadoes, as unpredictable as they are, usually arrive with darkened skies and the unmistakable roar of wind. But what happens when death comes silently? No warning, no sound, no chance to run. On August 21st, 1986, in the remote highlands of northwestern Cameroon, an invisible killer crept through the valleys while an entire region slept. By morning, more than 1,700 people were dead. Entire villages had been wiped out in a single night. Livestock lay motionless in fields. Birds had fallen from trees. Even insects had perished. And yet, not a single building was damaged. Not a single window was broken. It was as if some invisible hand had reached down and simply switched off every living thing within a 20-mile radius. The source of this silent massacre? A lake. A seemingly peaceful, crystal blue lake nestled in the crater of a dormant volcano. Lake Nyos had sat quietly in those mountains for centuries, visited by local villagers who fished its waters and farmed its fertile shores. No one suspected that beneath its calm surface, a time bomb was building pressure, year after year, waiting for the moment it would finally release its deadly payload. When it did, there was no explosion, no fire, no lava, just a massive cloud of carbon dioxide, heavier than air, rolling down the hillsides at highway speeds, filling every valley, seeping into every home, suffocating every living creature in its path. People died in their beds without ever waking up. Farmers collapsed mid-stride while trying to flee. Entire families were found together, untouched but lifeless, as if they had simply fallen asleep and never woken up. The Lake Nyos disaster remains one of the strangest and most terrifying natural catastrophes in recorded history. It wasn't just unexpected. It was something no one even knew was possible. This is the story of the night a lake exploded and killed nearly 2,000 people without making a sound. August 22nd, 1986. For Dr. Emmanuel Ngu MB, it was supposed to be an ordinary morning. The chief of the Subum Village Health Center had spent the previous night working in the nearby town of Wombe. Now he was cycling home along the same rural road he had traveled dozens of times before. The air was still. The hills were quiet. Nothing about this morning suggested it would change his life forever. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of a dead antelope lying in the middle of the road. MBI slowed his bicycle and examined the animal. No visible wounds, no signs of a predator attack. Strange, but not alarming. Bushmeat was valuable in these parts. He tied the antelope to his bike and continued on his way. But then he saw another dead animal, and another. Birds lay motionless in the grass. A dog had collapsed near a tree. The further Mbe rode, the more bodies he encountered. This wasn't natural. Something had killed these creatures, and whatever it was had done so recently. Growing increasingly uneasy, MB made a decision. Instead of continuing straight to Subum, he would detour to the tiny village of Nyos, nestled in the valley near the lake that shared its name. Perhaps someone there could explain what was happening. Perhaps someone there had answers. What he found instead was a nightmare. The village was silent, not peaceful silent, dead silent. Bodies lay everywhere. Men slumped against doorways. Women collapsed in the dirt paths between huts. Children lying still where they had fallen. There was no movement, no sound, no crying, no moaning, no signs of life whatsoever. It was as if an invisible hand had simply switched off every living thing in the village. MBI called out. No one answered. He moved from house to house, checking for survivors, finding only corpses. The expressions on their faces weren't pained or terrified. They looked almost peaceful, as if they had simply fallen asleep and never woken up. MBI didn't know what had killed these people. He didn't know if he was in danger himself. All he knew was that he needed to tell someone what he had seen. He turned his bicycle around and pedaled back toward Wombe as fast as his legs could carry him. Within hours, word of the disaster had reached local officials. By evening, the governor of the Northwest region had been informed. By nightfall, the report had landed on the desk of President Paul Biya himself. Biya ordered immediate action. But there was a problem. Lake Nyos sat in one of the most remote corners of northwestern Cameroon. The roads were poor, the terrain was difficult. It would take 2 full days for army troops and medical teams to reach the affected area. 2 days. And in that time, No one outside the valley had any idea what had actually happened there. No one knew how many were dead. No one knew what had killed them. And no one knew if the danger had passed. When the Cameroonian army finally reached the Lake Nyos Valley, they found something far worse than anyone had imagined. This wasn't a localized incident. This was an apocalypse. The villages of Nyos, Subum, and Cha had been completely devastated. Bodies were scattered across the settlements in every possible position. Some lay in their beds, blankets still pulled over them, as if death had taken them mid-dream. Others were found slumped in doorways or collapsed along footpaths. Still others lay in nearby streams and at the edges of the forest, their final positions suggesting they had been running from something when they fell. But running from what? There was no fire, no flood damage, no collapsed buildings. Every structure stood exactly as it had before. Windows were intact, roofs were untouched. The physical world was perfectly preserved. Only the living things were gone. And it wasn't just people. Cattle lay dead in their fields. Goats and chickens had collapsed where they stood. Dogs, birds, even insects had perished. The valley had become a mass grave for every creature that breathed. Yet the soldiers found one detail that made no sense. The bodies bore strange, greasy red stains on their clothing, and every victim showed signs of suffocation, as if the air itself had turned against them. The government's first priority was preventing an epidemic. With no clear understanding of what had caused the deaths, officials feared disease could spread from the decomposing bodies. Orders came down immediately. Bury everyone. Bury them fast. For days and nights, soldiers dug burial pits without rest. They stopped counting the bodies. There were simply too many. Nearby, army bulldozers carved massive trenches into the earth to dispose of the thousands of dead animals. The scale of death was overwhelming. The cause remained completely unknown. Amid the horror, there were survivors. Roughly 300 people had somehow escaped death that night. They were rushed to the hospital in Nkambe, where doctors documented their symptoms: dizziness, severe breathing difficulties, skin lesions that looked like chemical burns. These people had encountered whatever killed their neighbors, but they had lived to tell about it. And what they told investigators was chilling. On the night of August 21st, they had heard a series of deep rumbling sounds coming from the direction of Lake Nyos. The rumbling lasted only a few minutes, followed by a powerful smell, something like gunpowder or rotten eggs, then nothing. Most survivors lost consciousness immediately and didn't wake until the following day. One detail stood out. Nearly all of them lived on the hills above the main villages. The people in the valleys below had not been so fortunate. Fearing the unknown threat could still linger, the government launched a massive evacuation. More than 4,000 people were relocated to temporary camps within the first week. For half of them, the resettlement would become permanent. Their villages, their farms, their entire lives had been erased in a single night. There was nothing left to return to. As news of the disaster spread, the international community responded. Food and medical supplies poured into Cameroon from around the world. Foreign medical teams arrived to help treat survivors. But among the aid workers came a different group entirely. American scientists, drawn not by humanitarian concern, but by scientific curiosity. They wanted to understand what had happened here, because nothing about this disaster made sense. For the local population, the explanation was simple: the lake was cursed. 3 years earlier, a powerful tribal chief known as the Lake Chief had died. On his deathbed, he instructed his family to sacrifice his best cow in a ritual to honor his passing. But after his death, his relatives substituted a smaller, less valuable animal instead. The people believed the late chief's spirit had been furious. The disaster was his revenge from beyond the grave. The scientists weren't convinced by supernatural wrath, but they did agree on one thing: the lake was somehow responsible. Their first clue came from mapping the casualties. The overwhelming majority of deaths occurred within a 12-mile radius of Lake Nyos, concentrated along the valley running east and west from its shores. The further from the lake, the fewer the bodies. Whatever had killed these people had originated from the water itself. Their second clue came from the survivors: the rumbling sounds, the smell of rotten eggs, the sudden unconsciousness. These details pointed towards some kind of gas release. But what kind of gas? And how could a lake produce enough of it to kill nearly 2,000 people? Their third clue was the lake itself. Lake Nyos had always been known for its stunning, clear blue color. But when scientists arrived, the water had turned a deep, unsettling red. Here's where the science comes in. Don't worry, I'll keep it simple. Lake Nyos isn't an ordinary lake. It's a crater lake formed in the caldera of a dormant volcano in the Oku volcanic plain. Deep beneath its floor lies a magma chamber that continuously leaks carbon dioxide into the water. This makes Nyos one of only 3 lakes in the world that are saturated with CO2. In most lakes, water layers mix regularly. Wind, rain, and temperature changes cause warm surface water and cold deep water to circulate. This mixing allows dissolved gases to escape harmlessly into the atmosphere. But Lake Nyos sits in a tropical climate where temperatures remain remarkably consistent year-round. The water layers never mix. The carbon dioxide pumped in from below has nowhere to go. It simply accumulates at the bottom, dissolved under immense pressure, building up year after year. Think of it like a sealed bottle of soda. The CO2 stays dissolved as long as the pressure holds. But shake that bottle or release the cap, and the gas explodes outward. Lake Nyos had been building pressure for centuries. On August 21st, 1986, something finally triggered the release. Scientists call it a limnic eruption. The locals just called it the night the lake exploded. The scale of what Lake Nyos unleashed that night is almost impossible to comprehend. Scientists estimate the limnic eruption released between 100,000 and 300,000 tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That's approximately 1.2 cubic kilometers of lethal gas expelled in a matter of minutes. The eruption itself was violent. A column of water shot 330 feet into the air as the gas burst from the depths. An 82-foot wave swept across the lake's surface, scouring the shoreline. Along with the carbon dioxide came other gases that had been trapped below, including sulfur dioxide and hydrogen sulfide. That explains the smell of rotten eggs and gunpowder that survivors reported just before losing consciousness. But the true horror came next. The released carbon dioxide didn't simply float away. It formed a dense cloud roughly 160 feet thick and began rolling down the hillsides into the surrounding valleys. The gas moved fast, somewhere between 12 and 30 miles per hour, following the terrain like water flowing downhill. And it moved in complete silence. Here's what makes carbon dioxide so deadly. It's heavier than air. When released in massive quantities, it doesn't rise and disperse. It sinks, pooling in low-lying areas and displacing the oxygen that every living creature needs to survive. At concentrations of just 10%, carbon dioxide causes convulsions, unconsciousness, and death. The cloud that rolled through the Lake Nyos Valley that night was far more concentrated than that. Now, imagine 300,000 tons of invisible gas filling every valley, every home, every room where people lay sleeping. They never heard it coming. They never smelled it until it was too late. They simply stopped breathing and never woke up. The people who survived did so only because they lived on higher ground, above the elevation where the dense gas cloud settled. The final death toll, according to the United Nations, was 1,746 people. Many believe the actual number was higher. An additional 3,500 livestock perished alongside them. It remains one of the deadliest natural disasters in African history, and certainly the strangest. But the nightmare wasn't over. When scientists tested the lake in the following months, they discovered something terrifying. Carbon dioxide was already accumulating again. The same conditions that caused the 1986 eruption were rebuilding. Without intervention, it was only a matter of time before Lake Nyos killed again. For 10 years, researchers searched for a solution. What they eventually developed was surprisingly simple: degassing tubes. The system works by lowering pipes deep into the lake, just above the floor, where CO2 saturated water sits under pressure. A pump lifts this water toward the surface. As it rises, the pressure decreases, and the dissolved gas escapes safely into the open air. The first tube was installed in 1995, another followed in 2001, and 2 more in 2011. Today, the system releases carbon dioxide at roughly the same rate it accumulates, maintaining a delicate balance that keeps the lake from ever reaching critical pressure again. It's an elegantly simple solution to a problem that once seemed unsolvable. Today, Lake Nyos still carries the iron red stain of that August night in 1986. The color serves as a permanent reminder of what happened here, a scar on the water that refuses to fade. The valley below remains largely empty. Ruins of villages that once held hundreds of families now stand silent, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. The people who survived have built new lives elsewhere, but the memories of what they lost can never be rebuilt. The degassing system continues to operate, pipes reaching down into the depths, quietly releasing the carbon dioxide that still seeps up from the magma chamber below. It's a simple solution to an almost incomprehensible problem. Tubes and pumps holding back a force that once killed nearly 2,000 people in a single night. So far, it has worked. But scientists continue to monitor the lake closely because they know the truth that Lake Nyos revealed to the world. Nature doesn't always warn us before it strikes. What makes the Lake Nyos disaster so haunting isn't just the death toll, it's the silence. It's the fact that an entire region was suffocated in their sleep by something they couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't fight. There was no explosion to wake them, no flames to flee from, just an invisible wave of gas heavier than the air they breathed, filling their homes and stealing the oxygen from their lungs before they could even open their eyes. Before August 21st, 1986, no one knew a lake could explode. No one knew that water could store a lethal gas for decades, building pressure until it finally released all at once. No one knew that death could come so quietly, so completely, with so little warning. Now we know. And that knowledge, as disturbing as it is, might be the only thing that prevents it from happening again. If a silent killer was building beneath a lake near your home, would anyone even think to check? That's the question Lake Nyos forces us to ask. And it's one that still doesn't have an easy answer.